Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is on budgeting for the unknown. I have the great pleasure of having four esteemed individuals next to me, or I should say side by side, on today's webinar, where we're going to touch up on many topics that have to do with budgeting and your community association. This year is probably going to be a more challenging year than any other year. However, we brought in an amazing group of experts that can kind of chime in on their side and how they can be able to help you, your board, as well as if you're a manager, on what tips you could take in order to either persuade or discuss with your board what steps should be taken during this budgeting process. I'm going to give it just about 15-20 seconds to let everybody log in. We do have a Q&A option available, so if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A option. It's either going to be located at the top or the bottom of the screen. The team and I will do our best to answer the questions. If not, we'll ask them live as we go. If we don't get to your questions, we will provide our contact information, and you can reach out to one of us individually, and we'll be glad to help you in any way that we can. So why don't we get started with today's webinar, again, on budgeting for the unknown. And I'll start here to the left of my screen. Erin, if you want to say a little bit about yourself and the firm you represent.
Absolutely. Thank you, Raphael. My name is Erin Nickerson with the Rapid Response Team. We are an emergency services, fully licensed general contractor. So if you have water, fire, mold, COVID cleaning, biohazard cleanup, how I like to describe us is if it's on the interior side of your building and it's not supposed to be there, we clean and we remove that, as well as dry out services post water event. Thank you, Raphael.
Excellent. Thank you, Erin. And next up, I have Nicole Johnson.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for attending. We're a full service CPA firm. We concentrate in the area of HOAs, condominiums, developer turnovers, co-ops. We really do year-end financial reporting, consulting on budgeting, which is a great class we're doing today. We've had a lot of calls this year regarding what should we be doing, because we don't know. We can't rely on our 2020 budget because of the COVID situation and 2021. We also do year-end tax returns and anything out of the ordinary for associations.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Nicole. And next I have Paula.
Thank you, everyone, and good morning. I'm Paula Mera. I'm with the law firm of Rosenbaum, PLLC. I've practiced 19 years in South Florida, representing primarily condo, HOA, a lot of country club law as well. I work with my colleagues, Steve Brighton, Michael Casanova, focusing again on corporate counsel, litigation counsel when you need it, bankruptcy, foreclosure. So I'm happy to be here today. This is going to be, I think, a really great and informative panel.
Great. Thank you so much, Paula. And last but not least, Matt.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Matt Reedy with Plastridge Insurance. If you don't know Plastridge, we're a 102-year-old agency specializing in condo, HOA, and co-op. Today, we represent a little over 1,100 condos, HOAs, and co-ops, primarily in Southeast Florida.
Excellent. Thank you so much. As for myself, my name is Raphael Aquino. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Affinity Management Services. We are a community association management company servicing Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County. So if you have any challenges with your associations, feel free to reach out to us and we'll do our best to be able to help you if we can. So let's get to some business here. Again, this is an interesting topic. I think we probably could go on here for probably the entire day, but we have an hour, so we'll do our best to keep it as condensed as possible. But there's so much going on this year with what occurred at Champlain, with what's occurred with COVID, and many things that are going on. We have Amendment 2 that was passed, which is going to increase the minimum wages, which started in September 30th, and it's going to increase $1 from there forward. We have that increase is going to impact many things within your association for things such as landscaping, security services, and many other services that are within that range of pay. You're going to see impacts. Further, we're all going through some form of a labor shortage, whether it be from the accounting side, from a maintenance side, from an insurance, every industry that I've been talking to lately is having a major issue on the staffing side. So that's obviously pushing wages up and making things a little bit more challenging. And with what the tragedy that occurred at Champlain, you've seen construction costs skyrocketing. And at this point, before you used to be able to negotiate, and now we're at the point where really there's no negotiation. If not, they just move on to the next project. So that's a challenge now when you're going through your budgeting process. And last but not least is insurance. I'm sure many of you have seen insurance skyrocketing. So I want to give our panelists an opportunity to kind of chit chat on what they're seeing, how we can approach things, so that, again, you could take this knowledge to your association, to your boards, or if you're a manager, to your community. So Matt, I want to start with you because I know we've seen some serious increases in premiums. What are you seeing that the increases are, on what particular lines are you seeing it? And do you believe there's an end in sight where this will stable itself out?
Yeah, I mean, good questions. It's been absolutely brutal, really, over the last 6 to 12 months, but we've obviously been seeing increases for about 2-3 years here in Florida. So there's a lot of different factors that are going into this. It's not just, Irma, but Ida is a 35 to $40 billion projected claim. Reinsurance costs are skyrocketing for the insurance companies. The 2020 storm season, though we've been spared primarily, here in South Florida, 2020 storm season had 4 major storms hit between Texas and Florida. And that's a lot of the reason you see a company like AMCAP, who went from AM Best A- rated in the beginning of February to insolvent by the time we got into mid-April. So another, on that note, another one of the reasons you see it is we have several companies that have either pulled out of the state of Florida, AMCAP went under. Companies are dialing back the amount of limits that they're able to allocate for specific areas. So not only are there fewer companies, but the companies that are left are typically offering less in limits. So we're fishing from a smaller pool, and kind of like with the labor supply, as they get to be more selective on who they want to insure, that's going to drive prices up because, use AMCAP as an example. There were a couple companies that, are clear and obvious choices of where we wanted to move that to, because they're stable companies, they're good companies, they handle claims well. And they had their choice of who they wanted, and they would give me 3 days and say, you have 72 hours to tell us if this is binding. If they don't take it, the quote's pulled, and we're going to move it over to somebody else. So there's a lot of issues all at once compounding. And the last part I'd touch on is the litigated claim amount in Florida makes it really unique compared to other areas of the country, because I've had a couple opportunities to speak with folks from other areas of the state, even insurance professionals. And, up north, if you're a 10 to 15% increase, you're probably doing pretty good with that. But down here, and I think this was your initial question of, well, what are we seeing in South Florida? It's really hard to do a budget right now and to really even commit to a number. And I've categorized my renewals in 2 different pools. One is if you get a renewal from the incumbent company and you're between 20 and 30% on a renewal from who you're already with, typically they're going to keep 9 out of 10 of those renewals. And it's the associations in the second pool that have gotten hit the absolute hardest, in that their insurer is one of the ones who can either no longer offer the policy they had before, and so you're having to restructure how the policy was set up, or their insurer has completely left the state of Florida in general, or Tri-County. And so now you've lost your renewal quote, and you're jumping into and being thrown into the market at whatever today's market rate is. And sometimes that kind of feels like trying to buy fresh seafood when you live in Ohio. So it's been absolutely brutal. And, I'm tired of giving bad news to good people, but the market's in trouble at this point. And Citizens went from, I think, 1,400 policies or 1,600, what was it, 1.4 million or 1.6 million. I keep mixing up on which number that is, down to 400,000 policies.
Wow.
And that was in 2018, 2019 when they got down. There was a concerted effort to move everybody out of Citizens because, one, you don't want to be with the state market of last resort unless you have none. But the way the market's gone is they were at 700,000 policies. I think are expected to be around 700,000 policies by the end of this year, pushing up to 800. So Citizens is going to almost double in a 2-year span because there's just nobody else left. And the litigation is certainly not helping. I think the last part of your question was, is there an end in sight to the chaos? And, you kind of just have to look at how market dynamics typically work. Is companies are bailing out because they don't think they're making any money, or in Florida in particular. And there's a lot of data that shows us the claims are more litigated in Florida. Citizens did a study, or the Florida Office of Insurance Regulations did a study that was penned by the president, was released in April, that showed that Florida accounted for 8% of property claims when they studied 750 domestic property insurers. In that study, Florida accounted for 76% of litigated property claims. So we were 8% of claims nationally and 76% of litigated claims. And okay, so the argument from the public adjuster standpoint is, well, that's because Florida companies don't pay claims compared to other states. And I don't know if that statement may be true in some degree, but not to justify that large of a disparity between the claims. And by the way, most of these companies are also working in Texas and Louisiana and Alabama, and they're not having these same issues. So there's some market dynamics as far as attorneys, and we've discussed this in previous webinars, and that's a long rabbit hole to go down, but there's some market dynamics that incentivize these kinds of things from public adjusters and attorneys to go after the insurance companies. And I'll finish with this: is Aspen Specialty is one of the last standing liability markets writing condo HOA. They have a specialized program. And I did a webinar at the beginning of this year where I sat down with the senior underwriter out of Ponte Vedra, and Florida, or Palm Beach County, Broward County, Miami-Dade County accounted for 28% of their total premium, and they write nationally. They write across the whole country. Some areas they're more competitive than others, but they do write nationally. So Palm Beach, Broward, Miami-Dade was 28% of their premium intake. Those counties alone were 34% of their paid claims. So on a national level, there's a 6% disparity. And Palm Beach County had the largest, I think it was close to 50% of their large loss claims were paid from Palm Beach County alone, which they defined as claims over 25,000. So it's brutal news. I'm tired of delivering these kinds of increases, but when you kind of see some of the data, it's hard to make an argument against it. So you put your best foot forward, you get your ducks in a row, and you get ready to present everything you can to the insurance underwriter on why they want to write that. And I think we've got a couple questions later that will dive into that. So there's my
Matt, do you advise, on that note, do you advise people this year to get those appraisals done now, like to get new appraisals due to what's going on in the insurance industry? Are you advising that?
So for condos, there's a statute already that they have to update that appraisal every 36 months. And it's a two-edged sword because you're required to do it, but we've seen for the last 6, 7, 8 years, costs have gone up every year anyways. So right now, and it depends on the area, but right now it's usually between 5 and 10% in the increase in values. And where that's a two-edged sword is not only are you taking a 20 to 30% increase if you get a good renewal, but then you're adding an additional 10% into that because now your building's worth 10% more. Exactly. And it costs more to insure your building for 10% more. So yeah, that's completely proportional.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, and I'm glad you brought up the point about how challenging it is to be able to gauge what the potential cost would be, because I know that's been a challenge for our managers. A lot has to do with your location, but a lot has to do also with the property type and everything else that's involved. Also, the insurance companies have gotten a little bit more savvier now, making sure that they're being pickier. So if your property is not in proper condition or it has certain issues, they're not going to bind coverage. Before you would be able to get some time to cure it, but now they're taking a different approach. So these are different things that as managers and board members, you need to keep top of mind. And with that said, Aaron, when it comes to maintenance, I know especially with buildings, I mean, it even happens in townhome communities where we have leaks and we have these kinds of situations where the water causes damage. And those are expenses that are very difficult to calculate and understand what the out-of-pocket cost would be to the association. Could you give us a little bit of guidance of what those average costs could be? I know there are many factors. And also, is there anything that a board can do to let's say, minimize that expense?
100%. I'm going to also piggyback on what Matt says. In Palm Beach County alone, over the last year and a half, I've seen a significant increase in large losses over $25,000. So the first thing that you can do as an association to reduce these costs to the association is to have a plan in place. What is your plan to deal with a large loss situation? What role does your team on site play in that plan? And what role as a board member and a manager do you play in that plan? We need to also think about our deductible. If you look at your loss history for the past 5 years, and your insurance agent can help you get that loss history, how many claims that you filed for specific property damage, that gives you a budgetable number to add as a line item into your budget for this year. And I highly encourage you to at least put your deductible for per loss occurrence. So if you're averaging 3 losses a year, maybe it's 5 losses a year that the association is responsible for, budget that in for your deductible at a very bare minimum. That way you're financially prepared for it. So I guess your first question was, what is the cost that's generally associated with water loss?
Right.
The first cost that you're going to incur is an extraction cost, the physical water that I see when I arrive on site to the job. So how can you minimize the cost? Because we charge per linear foot that we extract of water. So keeping extraction tools on your property will help reduce that cost. So maybe you have shop vacs, maybe you have extraction tools like you clean your rugs on your property or in a high-rise building. Those types of tools and have your team respond first and get up that water they physically see will help reduce your bill. The second thing we charge for is a daily equipment rental. If you have a few fans and a dehumidifier on property, you actually can handle a small, clean water loss in-house. And I can come and help your team and teach your team how to actually do that. You should be able to handle those small day-to-day leaks from unit owner to save the association some money. Anything more than that, we do recommend a licensed and insured professional to be dealing with those situations for liability purposes. We also have a couple other fees that are commonly associated with water losses. The plumbing that's associated that caused that loss is at an association's pipe that needs to be repaired. We need to build into our budget a line item for plumbing replacement, plumbing repair. Again, go back at your loss history and look at how much you've spent yearly over the last 5 years in pipe replacements for your buildings, especially if you're a condo that's on the beach and you have cast iron pipes. This is something that is super, super common for you, especially. I also see a lot of plumbing issues in buildings that were built between 2002 and 2009 that have PVC piping. Sometimes they've used the incorrect elastomeric when they install the pipes, especially on fire safety, and those can cause a lot of problems. So making sure that you keep accurate maintenance records when people do come to repair these pipes and replace them is also really, really important and will help minimize the cost and potentially give you somebody to blame should you have a repair. That I had a building in Palm Beach County that was doing a plumbing repair, and the elbow that was installed on the pipe wasn't done correctly. And then they had a loss that was over $100,000 that occurred the next morning, but they had that repair on record that it was done by this specific company and it had failed. So when they went to file their insurance claim, it was a textbook subrogation case. And I know Matt's going to talk about that a little bit as well. Some other things that you need to do to prepare for the cost of this is education. Education with your unit owners, education with your boards on who is responsible for what. When we're talking large loss situations, we want the association to take control of that situation. If we have a unit owner that has had a toilet that has been in this building for 50 years and that's never been replaced that caused the loss, do we want that person taking control of a 17-floor dry out process? Probably not. That's not a good situation to put the board in. And it's not a good situation to put your individual unit owners in as well. When you have a unit owner that causes damage to your building, you can go after them for that damages after, but the project itself needs to be handled correctly and the association needs to stay in control. The other thing that we want to talk about is pre-structured pricing when it comes to losses. The vast majority of restoration companies, at least the big guys like myself and my competitors in the market, we have predetermined agreements and contracts that we can come up with a structurized price list and a pre-loss contingency program on how to service your property best. So if you're a high-rise condo and you do not have one of these programs in place, you have professionals like myself in the industry that will sit with you and come up with a plan for your community. And we can make sure that you are saving costs and make sure that the association's not spending money where they shouldn't be spending money. A lot of times I see associations stepping in and paying for paint on walls and baseboards to be reinstalled, manipulation of people's contents and physical belongings in their units. That is not an association cost, and you should not be paying for those things. This is why we want to encourage our unit owners that the HO6 policy in a condo is necessary, because it's not a matter of if water is going to happen in a condo, it's when that water is going to happen to them in that condo. And if they do not have that HO6 policy, they are going to pay out of pocket to restore their unit after the association has dried that drywall. So it's important to understand that that association policy works in tandem with the unit owner policy to put everybody back together accordingly.
Excellent. Some great tips there, Erin. What I'd like to add to that as well as for the managers that are on, it's making sure you know where your water shutoffs are as well, because that could definitely reduce maybe 3 or 4 units, instead of 17, 20 units, maybe bring it down to 3 to 4. If maintenance and everybody knows where those shutoff valves are, whether it be fire or domestic. And as you stated, I mean, there was legislation at one point that required, board members to confirm if each unit owner had the necessary HO6 policy. That was changed some time ago. However, we're talking about this so freely because we do this on a day-to-day, but maybe Matt, you could give some insight on what that HO6 policy does, how important it is, because I know from a management side, it's very challenging to have to deal with the resident, which we understand, we're very compassionate, but when they don't have coverage, it's very difficult for them to understand that there was a loss in another unit and the association is not responsible for their tiles or for their baseboards or for any paintings they may have had on the wall and so forth. So maybe if you could give our listeners here a little bit of an understanding of what an HO6 policy is and what it covers.
I'd be happy to. And there's a couple different talk tracks that both of you hit on that I'll try to tie into it as well. So for all you listening, the HO6 policy is the specialized policy designed specifically for condo units. And Florida statute determines that the association's responsible for up to and including the unfinished drywall. So your unit's going to begin with the coverings, the drywall, the coverings, the ceiling, the floors, coverings of the floors, and everything in and on the cabinetry. And this is something that I've found over time is, I guess, somewhat unique to the state of Florida in that per statute, everybody's responsible for their own property in the absence of negligence, and negligence isn't always that easy to show, especially if it's just a pipe burst, unless you open up the wall every 5 years or think it's reasonable to open up a wall every 5 years to see if a pipe is leaking or not. Eventually it's going to go if the building's 50 years old. So everybody should have their own policy, the association and every unit owner in the building. And Raphael, to your point, I think it was 2009, the statute was placed that every owner in every condo had to have it. And it was a great idea, but it was a bookkeeping nightmare to keep track of who had a policy and who didn't. And, then there were always the individuals who would buy the policy, show proof, and then cancel it the next week and just eat whatever minimum premiums there were tied to it. So, well, it's still a very, very good idea, and everybody should absolutely have that policy. There were some technical issues to that statute. So one of the things I see all the time when I have these claims is, get multiple people involved. Eventually somebody's not going to have a policy because they don't have a mortgage or nobody's holding a gun to their head to force them to buy this. And it's an important point to make that just because you don't have the policy doesn't mean that you're uninsured. It means that you're self-insured. And your decision not to buy insurance does not make it somebody else's problem. The water leak could have started above you, but Florida statute says that it's your responsibility. That would be either on you or on your policy to help pay. And kind of tying in, Aaron touched on this a little bit, the worst claims that I get involved in are the ones where not enough people or nobody has insurance, and they also don't have the money to pay for it out of pocket. So they end up suing the association, creating a much, much larger claim for the association and blowing up their policy for the next 5 years because A, they didn't buy a policy, and then B, they didn't have the self-insuring funds to pay for the damages on their own and take responsibility for what the statute says there is. And kind of ties back into my first, I'll call it a rant, where we kind of hit on, there are some things from a statutory standpoint that make it easier for attorneys to go after claims they probably have no business going after because they can keep getting paid and nobody's going to recover those funds against them, the defense costs at least. So
yeah, it's very challenging to have to deal with that. Honestly, I wish the mortgage companies, it would make it much easier if just like if you buy a home in an HOA, that mortgage company requires you to have a policy, would make it easier in the condo world if that similar practice was followed. But either way, I know we have challenges as well, especially as the buildings get older. We have issues with plumbing and pipes. And I know it comes across our table a lot of, well, who's responsible to pay for those repairs? And is it the responsibility of the owners? Is it the responsibility of the association? And many times, you have to review your documents. So Paula, I want to chime you in. Could you give us a little bit from a legal side? How will the association know whether or not they have the responsibility of repairing those pipes or fixing those pipes if there was a leak or if they bursted?
Thank you. Well, the general premise is we are going to look to see whether those pipes serve one unit or more than one unit. If it's more than one unit, then it's going to be the association's responsibility to repair, replace, and especially, as you mentioned, older pipes, maintain those pipes. I think it was Matt that spoke to the fact that it's hard and difficult to open up walls when something doesn't happen yet, right?
Mhm.
So typically, unfortunately, we're going to be repairing those pipes when we know something has gone wrong. And then we're going to determine whose responsibility that pipe may be. It's either the association or the unit owner. As Aaron mentioned, though, a very important takeaway point is the association may actually start to own liability if it doesn't respond timely and quickly, even if it is a unit owner pipe in unit 808. And 808 has caused damage all the way down the stack of your condo building, whether it's 2 units stacked or 8 or 13 units, right? So that pipe leak has occurred. It's very important for our condo association clients to understand that the timely response is key to stop your liability, and then, of course, making sure that the unit owner who is responsible for that particular pipe leak own that liability. So we don't want to not mitigate the damages. We want to make sure we're timely. So again, the takeaway point is we're usually going to look at this directly as to whether or not whose pipe is, who is responsible for that particular pipe. But it doesn't stop there. The analysis definitely goes to the next layer of what do we do next? How do we stop our liability from occurring, even if it is a unit owner pipe? I think Matt brought up a couple good points as well with respect to making sure that when you do have the ability to, statute changed for a small amount of time, I think it was 2 years, about 10 years ago, Florida statute required condominium owners to have an HO6. That lasted for a couple of years, and then they took it back out of the statute. However, you can amend your condominium documents to provide that your condo owners are required to have an HO6 policy. And that is something we highly recommend, especially if you are a high rise, or even if you're 2 or 3 floors, because that is going to make or break the day with respect to who is going to be calling, who's going to be seeking the money. And at the end of the day, the association board can rely upon those other insurance carriers to battle it out, as opposed to fighting with that uninsured owner and having to seek, having to come to my office to determine whether or not and how we are involved. Even though, unfortunately, you may not be involved with respect to liability at all, you're still involved because you're still the association. So that's important to keep in mind. I do highly recommend amending your governing documents to provide that each condo owner will have an HO6 policy. And then you also have, as a component of that amendment, the ability to confirm and have that person submit their insurance requirements. And Matt can kind of touch upon this as well. Some of the amendments that I see from time to time with that requirement, and again, this kind of really goes to the pipe issue because that's where we see most of the issues.
Yeah.
The pipe has leaked, or the water heater has burst, or the toilet has leaked, whatever it is. From what I understand, although some of the amendments that I see indicate that if you do not and you fail to obtain insurance for an HO6, the association can obtain that policy for you. My understanding that doesn't actually operate that way in the insurance industry. I do see a lot of amendments that require that. But from what I understand, that's not something that the association can insure. So you definitely need to just A, require the owner to obtain the insurance policy, and then B, if they don't, you can enforce an injunction for that person to get and obtain the insurance policy. But the association is not able to obtain that insurable policy on behalf of the owner by force or by amendment in that declaration. But I think the bottom line, again, with respect to pipes, and I'll go back to what Aaron said, is ultimately, at the end of the day, when that pipe leaks, and this is my takeaway point because I see this often with my clients, they want to kick it back to the owner who caused the leak, or the pipe belongs to the owner that caused the leak. The association, in most instances, is responsible for the sheetrock in. You are responsible to get in there, dry it out, clean it out, fix the sheetrock, work with the owner to do so. If it's a stack and you're dealing with 3 or 4 owners below that particular leak instance, you deal that instantly. Otherwise, whether it's the person's pipe that leaked or not, if the association is not acting timely, the association is opening itself up to additional liability, which it otherwise shouldn't have owned.
Correct. And as you said, Paula, we do see that all the time where they're trying to just push it back to the owner. And, our recommendation is, listen, let's get the legal opinion on it. That way we have something in writing and we confirm what we need to confirm. I do have a question here for you that I'd like to keep it with you here. Is from Gabriel. Gabriel asked, can they go after a unit owner to cover the deductible that the HOA had to pay, which let's say the condo had to pay for the damages caused?
In some instances, yes. And if it's the deductible for the association's insurance, then yes, we would seek that deductible, and we would look at, again, very fact case basis on what that looks like to seek that deductible from the owner.
Okay.
Again, if you have that HO6 requirement, then it's the insurance company against the insurance company with subrogation, which is where we like to be. And then you don't have to call me.
Correct. It makes it much easier for everyone, for yourself, for management, for the board, if those HO6 policies were definitely in place. So Nicole, I want to kind of get you in. I know now that we're in the midst, or hopefully most associations at least have that first draft of the budget. Many times, we'll get either from board members that don't understand too much what a fund balance is. Can you explain what it is and how the fund balance is impacted when association is constantly over budget?
Sure. So it's the loaded question every year I get that associations call and say, we have all this money in fund balance, so we're going to lower our dues next year. Not a good decision. So let's start this way. It's not always comparing apples to apples. What I mean by that is associations will say standard across the industry is to have 2 to 3 months worth of operating in your fund balance. Well, that all depends on the community. Are you fully funding reserves? Do you have enough in your operating budget to have a surplus so then you have fund balance for future years? What amenities are you covering? Are you partially or fully funding? So there's a lot of things to go into what a fund balance should be comprised of. So the first thing is, what is fund balance? So if you took the association from the day that it started from the developer and added up, subtracted and added all of the income statement, that flows through to your fund balance. So every year, if you have a surplus, your fund balance increases. If you have deficits, your fund balance decreases. It's the same thing like in a regular corporation when you have something called retained earnings. It's the equity in the association. What we've noticed in the last couple of years, especially through COVID, is a lot of the accountants are changing their mindset on that fund balance. The main reason is people will say, well, it's really the owner's money, so we should be refunded that money. It is being refunded in the sense that when you keep it in the fund balance, if you use it for a future project, the owner's getting the ability to use it because they're not being special assessed for it. If there's a surplus in the fund balance and they move it to reserves, they're getting the advantage of that because they're using it for a reserve item. So you're not technically refunding it through a check or a credit. You're giving it to the owners for future projects. So one of the things I always say when you're doing your budget, first thing is, do you have a good fund balance, financially secure fund balance? That also means, is your budget realistic? Why I say that is, you're not doing a budget based on where you want to be on your income, and then you do your expenses. You want to do your expenses first and say, this is truly where we need to be. And then you come up with the maintenance fees. Because if you're doing your income first, you're going to go line by line and say, oh, well, you know what? We won't do 3 tree trimmings. Or you know what? Maybe we'll try to do something with the insurance, which we know is impossible. Maybe we'll look around for different contracts. It's not going to happen. So one of the most important things in budgeting with the fund balance is your budget realistic? And then also, how are you funding those reserves? And as we all know what happened in Surfside, many of the consulting I've done this year is many communities are trying to get up to the partially or at least partially or fully funding, because they're noticing that, yes, we've always been, especially the communities that have waived the reserves, all they're doing is pushing it down the road. And what I try to tell them is, think about it this way. You live in a community that people are on fixed incomes and you waive the reserves. Let's just use this as a scenario. Today, that dollar that you have said we're not going to fund the reserves, that dollar to that person on Social Security in 5 years from now is $10 to them. If you did it every year, that dollar would not impact them like the $10 that will impact them in 5 years. As you save, just like your own personal, you should have enough that if something comes due, that you're able to handle that, even in your personal residence. You should be putting aside for your roof or things that are done on your personal property. So that fund balance is key to the financial stability of the community. And people that are coming down to Florida now are actually looking at the financials. It's amazing because for the last 17 years I've done this work, hardly anybody reads the audit. Now everybody's reading the audit and saying, where's the disclosures? And they're saying, are you fully funding? Do you have low receivables? And what is your fund balance? Are you a financially secure community?
Correct. And those are excellent points, Nicole. And one thing that you have to keep in mind as a border manager is, we haven't gone into the topic too much into inflation because that would be another whole rabbit hole. But, CPI has been 5.5, I believe it was last month. And there's certain things that aren't included in CPI. We've seen home prices going up 20, 30%. So, there's a reality that things are going to go up. And I've been wanting to stress the whole amendment too, because I don't think it's being taken seriously. And I think it will be in about 2 to 3 years, but it may be too late because it's going to impact these associations so much. If you do those gradual increases now, when the time comes of $15 an hour, it's not going to be such a big impact. So to give you like an example, most security guards are paid anywhere between now $10 an hour minimum to maybe $12, $13. There's a markup of normally on average 40 to 50%. That jump to $15 is going to be a major increase for those associations that have 24/7 guards or multiple guards. And the same thing goes with landscaping or janitorial services within your communities. So grabbing that fund balance and just saying, hey, we have an excess, let's just return the money back to the association. I definitely would agree with you that it's not the right move to make, especially with all the increases that we should all expect in the coming years. So Paula, Nicole mentioned about reserves and she mentioned with the impacts of Champlain. What's your input on when it comes to the reserves? What do you believe your thoughts of what's going to happen? Do you believe that they're going to allow partially funded, or you think they'll require fully funded? What's your thoughts on what can potentially happen in the future? You're on mute, Paula. There we go.
Okay, so thanks. That's a great question. And the tragedy that occurred, of course, touched us all in so many ways, whether you're a board member or just someone watching the news or in the industry that we're in, which I know my mind was spinning in so many different directions, as were everyone on this panel, right? With what we do every day and how it's going to affect what we do and how we service our clients and how we direct our clients and how we counsel our clients. I think most importantly to point out to those that don't know, the Florida Bar, of course, has a committee, a condo HOA, community plan development committee. And immediately after the Surfside tragedy, that committee formed a group to start looking at legislation. I would imagine, and I would hope that legislation will be passed in the next 2022 calendar year to be effective on July 1st. I would also, again, these are my thoughts. I would hope that it's quite expedient with respect to fixing what went wrong. And that goes to my own personal beliefs. And I think Nicole touched upon this as well, as reserves and the ability to waive those reserves in the last 2 decades was legislative, as opposed to going a different direction to really hit home with respect to that's the roof over your head. That is the concrete that holds your unit up. Just to hit it straight, right? That is what we need to preserve. And the ability to waive reserves fully or to partially fund, I believe, again, in the last 2 decades, it's legislative. And I think you're going to see a total turnaround on that. I hope to see that, where perhaps a partial waiver is allowed, but fully waiving reserves will no longer be allowed. And I hope that that's where we land with respect to our aging condos. It's 2021. It's going to be 2050 before we know it. And then in 10 years, you guys will all have teenagers like I do now. So that's even going to be better for you, right? Just kidding. We were joking before everyone got on. These nice panelists have nice toddlers and cute kids. I have teenagers. So I digress. But to that point, as we all age, things happen differently, especially with our condo buildings. We have a co-op building that's 1952. who has adequately maintained their building. So unfortunately, people will do what they're required to do. And so with that said, I hope that in the legislative session for 2022, we see a lot of changes to reserves. I want to just point out, because I always think it's interesting, I do the board cert course from time to time, and I point this out during the course. And when we put the vote to waive or partially fund reserves, the bold language at the bottom of the vote proxy is as follows: waiving of reserves in whole or in part, or allowing alternative uses of existing reserves may result in unit owner liability for payment of, and this is what I want to point out, unanticipated special assessments regarding those items. I don't know how you call anything with respect to the condition and the maintenance of your building unanticipated. It's all anticipated. And it's very important, I think, and Matt can touch upon this with respect to where the industry for insurance is going to go on what the condition of your building is going to be. I know probably immediately the day following, all of the insurance industry was sitting around their board table figuring out what do we do next with respect to this. And I think, again, I hope that the committee comes together for the Florida Bar and really works with the legislation to make it through for July 1st, 2022, to not allow fully waiving of reserves. It's time that we understand that these buildings are aging, they're not getting any younger. And we have to make sure that our owners and our board, which by the way, I just want to point this out and I'll end it there. A lot of board of directors don't understand that that is their choice to put that to a vote of the owners. Yep. It's not an owner choice. That is a board of directors decision to say to the owners, here's your fully funded budget with fully funded reserves based upon our great reserve schedules, which by the way, they took out of the statute 2 years ago, 2018 rather, where you don't have to have reserve schedules every 3 to 5 years. It's like a board of discretion, board of directors discretion. I think they'll put that back in. But ultimately, as a board, it is up to you to say, we're going to put this vote to a fully funded reserve or potentially a partially funded, but fund it to some degree. And that's a board vote. Now, whether you're reelected the next year because your assessments go up, I can't speak to that. But at least you know you've done what you need to do to make sure that you have some funding there for your roof, your concrete restoration. And I think Nicole made the best point of this, probably this panel, is your dollar today is not your dollar in 5 years. You know, and so I think that also can encourage your board members when they have to speak to the membership to understand that there is a true value both in life safety and your dollar value to fully fund or at least partially fund your reserves.
No, I would agree. And I hope what you're saying, it does come to light, because it'll make everyone's life easier, especially if there's money to be able to manage what we need to manage. Things will get done in a much quicker stance. And also, if there's ever an opportunity to make the change in the law, it's now. I mean, and that's a way that we can honor all those that lost their lives in that tragedy, is really making sure that this never happens again. And the only way of doing that is just making sure that these associations are properly funded. And many times, you know, they want to push that responsibility onto us, the managers, and that's really not our responsibility to do. There's organizations that are certified to get you a reserve study that'll let you know all the components that you should be taking in mind, keeping in mind, I should say. While life safety, there's life safety, you have structural, and then there's a ton of other components that as residents of the association, you have no idea, but all those components have a useful life as well. So if you're not putting away for the items that you need, you're going to find yourself in a tough situation later down the line of, okay, what do we do? Do we upgrade the roof? Do we change the roof? Do we upgrade the elevators? And you have these difficult decisions to make. So being fully funded will allow for probably more board members, believe it or not, or individuals to run for the board, because they don't have to worry about, well, I have to pass the special assessment. It's on me and everything else that comes with it. So Nicole, I know you're dealing with a lot of your clients. I'm sure your phone is ringing off the charts, and you're getting a lot of questions when it comes to budget. So what are your recommendations for these boards and managers when it comes to the insurance deductibles? Because the deductibles, as property values continue to go up, you know, deductibles are a percentage of that policy. So what are you recommending that they do with those deductibles, and keeping into consideration with all the storms that we've been very fortunate to not have been hit, but it's only a matter of time before that comes?
Right. Well, it's funny. People say the unknown storms. I'm like, we live in Florida. There's
Yeah.
no such thing as the unknown storms.
Yeah.
We are prone to hurricanes. We are prone to large storms. I mean, look at the last one. It all went all the way up to New Jersey, and those
Yeah.
people weren't expecting it. So always expect that you're going to have storms or some type of natural disaster. Hurricane deductible, I'm very in favor of it. I think it is the best thing that legislation put in place, that they were able to put it away as a reserve. It's not a reserve line item as statutory. It's a non-statutory reserve because there's really no expected life on that. You may never use it. So it can be used for other items, but also lines of credit, having a line of credit open for the deductible if you don't want to put away for the hurricane deductible. The reason I say that is, it is most of these buildings, it is a large amount. You're talking about some of them over $1 million. And the issue is, if a hurricane hits, do you have that money set aside to be able to pay that deductible? And if you don't, are those people going to come to you first? I mean, Erin does this work all the time. They're going to want to go to the places that have the money, that have the cash, that have the hurricane deductible set aside. So you're going to be a priority, and you want your building to be that priority, be that financial security, and make sure that you're setting aside for it. It is not statutory. So if you put it aside and something does come up, you could use that money for its other purposes since it's not statutory. But most of my associations are starting to set aside for it because they're realizing how important it is to people that are coming into these communities for the condos, especially because they're the ones that have the large deductibles, and saying, why aren't we setting aside for this? This is a major thing. And especially if your budget is, you don't have a lot of fund balance and you don't really have a lot of reserves, and now a hurricane hits, where's the money going to come from? One of the other things is that it's very interesting, and it would be something for Paula too, she probably sees this, is if they don't have a hurricane deductible, let's say, and in their documents, they need a majority vote to pass a special assessment. What are they going to do? They're now in a situation where the building's been hit. They need to get the work done. They have no hurricane deductible, and they need a majority to get a special assessment passed. You really have to look at it from a whole. What do your documents prevent? Do you want to set aside for this? There's really a lot involved when you're looking at this from a board standpoint to make sure that you have everything in place if emergency hits, cash-wise, and the ability as a board to pass that.
Correct. Being put into that situation, as you said, Nicole, will not be pretty for anyone. It'll be very challenging. You're going to have misplaced residents not knowing where to put them. And it even becomes challenging even to get line of credits if you're in a tough situation where you have no cash. So making sure that you have the necessary tools is very important. And again, it's not that excuse, well, the previous board didn't do this and that. It's your fiduciary responsibility within the documents for you to do that. And Paula mentioned a great point, that it's important that board members understand that you don't need a membership vote to put reserves. In my experience, I've always noticed that when you do it, you're going to get the kicking and screaming for a week or 2 weeks as the notices go out and at that meeting. But once you get past that and you do that vote, most of the times people forget about it and they move on. And there's ways from a management side to be able to give a little bit to the owners in the sense of maybe show them something, because putting money away, no one sees anything. But just give them a couple little, cleaning, little painting here and there that makes it different, so that they say, okay, well, my money's being properly used. So there are techniques that you can use to make things a little bit easier for your residents and the board alike. Matt, so let's see if you have a trick that you could show us. Everyone's asking here, what can we do to reduce insurance costs? I know we get asked that question left and right. Is there any tricks that you have that you're pulling out of your sleeve to be able to help clients in today's day and age?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that there's any magic that's going to be found that maybe we weren't aware of, but the big points right now is, number one, the roof age. If you're coming up and you're pretty much due for a roof replacement, it really might be worth bringing that up. In the market right now, the roofs, because of the amount of litigated claims against the insurance company for roof damage, some of them real, some of them not. The roofs are the most sensitive part of the underwriting process for the vast majority of these companies. A lot of them have dialed back the amount of years they're willing to give you replacement cost values on your roof versus actual cash value. So if your weakest underwriting characteristic is the most sensitive topic for an underwriter right now, it's going to put you in a negative spot just to begin with. So roof replacements, don't cut your nose off to, spite your face, but if you can do the roof and don't move it up too soon, but that'll help. Impact glass shutters, always going to be a benefit to you. If you're doing major concrete restoration, a lot of these companies, when we have major building updates, they ask about these things, and try to be proactive and ask my clients, what have you done? Have you upgraded electrical? Have you upgraded plumbing? Has the HVAC been changed out? Have you had a major concrete restoration project in the last 5 years or even longer? Those kinds of things absolutely help, and especially in the wake of Surfside. Especially in the wake of Surfside, the concrete restoration is a major talking point with these underwriters when I'm sending everything. So if you've been able to have an engineer's report, hopefully everything's good. That's something we provided to underwriters to make them more comfortable with buildings. Concrete restoration, I do think, is going to be, those types of projects are going to be specifically asked about on the, especially high rise near the water, especially going to be looked at. So anything you've done in the past, and it doesn't have to be $1 million project, but if you're only a $3 million building and you had 250,000 worth of concrete restoration, that's significant, and it's worth showing to the underwriter, because even if they don't give you credits, it may be enough to make them comfortable with your building, to show that you're taking care of the building the way you need to be, and not just kind of letting it, progress to the point that they're afraid of a collapse. Because I don't think the increases we're seeing have changed really because of Surfside, but what it's done is it's absolutely scared and terrified these underwriters that this is repeatable, and hopefully it's not, and maybe it's not, but these underwriters are terrified of something like that. And just dive down into the cost of this claim already. Is the general liability paid out $2 million, the umbrella paid out $15 million, the directors and officers is going to pay $1 million, but because defense costs are outside the limit, there's over 40 attorneys representing claimants suing the directors and officers for the $1 million limit. That company's estimating about $6 million in defense costs to divvy up the $1 million. We're looking at about $30 million from the company who was on the property policy for that. You're looking at, I think, over $15 million from the policies of unit owners. I think that was just one personal lines company. I mean, this is going to be a $100 million claim by the time it's done, and sent shockwaves through different parts of the industry that you probably wouldn't have thought of. I mean, even contractors, the roofer, anybody who's worked on that building in the last 5 years is going to get named in that suit. And, it's a tragedy, and we're going to have some long-term effects in the market, but it's absolutely scared the underwriters and made them more cautious. And when we're already fishing from a more limited pond of companies, it's just made them more pessimistic, and it takes a little more nudging to get them to give you a decent quote if you really need it out of them.
Right. And being proactive.
Raphael, I want to touch upon one thing I didn't touch upon earlier, which I think is important, especially for our high-rise condos, which I know it's been mentioned in the paper, and this goes back to the legislation that we'll see next year. And that is, so that everyone understands, recertification is only in Miami-Dade and Broward, which I know we all know this, but maybe not a lot of our listeners understand that. So recertification is the 40-year limitation with respect to submitting to your local building department that you, as a condo, have recertified the safety of your structural and electric components of your building, and mechanical. For Broward and Miami-Dade, it's honestly like a 5-page form at this point in time, and it's pretty simplified. So I just want to point out that I think that any condo that is within a certain area of the, within certain 5 mile of the shoreline is going to have a different recertification process. As you go inward, landward, it's going to probably look a little bit different, but I think that certainly what you will see in 2022 is the fact that most of these buildings will require recertification. And I suppose instead of 40 years, they'll draw it back to 30 years. So I just wanted to point that out. That's something that definitely we can see in 2022.
Correct.
And with that said, I already have some clients. With that said, I don't know how many engineers can make their way down to Florida and become licensed in Florida, because we're already seeing a shortage. So if you're one of those high-rise condos, it may be wise to put yourself in the line with respect to getting something done in the next 6 months with respect to hiring your engineer so that you're in the queue to actually receive that professional service to recertify your building.
Correct. Great point. And thank you for bringing that up, Paula, because you definitely want to make sure that you're putting that into your budget. I know I've spoken to other management company owners throughout the country, and in their states, even Colorado is considering putting in, they don't have anything. They're considering putting something in. So it's interesting. This is going to impact the entire country. And as you stated, when it comes to the engineers, I know we deal firsthand with a lot of the experts that specialize in our industry, and they're overwhelmed. They're doing the best they can to bring in teams. And they're just putting things on queue, as you stated. So if your building's maybe 4 to 5 years out, don't think that I have time to get this done. Things are, if statute does change next year, things are going to get even tighter for both construction as well as from an engineering point. So great points there, Paula. Aaron, I want to kick it back to you because I know Nicole mentioned when it comes to storms and so forth. What do you recommend? Do you recommend having a contract in place for like storm damage in advance? And what are some of the cost savings that an association would see when it comes to that?
Well,
I see Matt saying yes, yes, yes.
Complete agreement, obviously. Yeah, but like a restoration contractor, it should be treated as any other contractor that you have on your property, like your landscaper, like your roofing company. You need to make sure that you have a contract going into storm season. And some people call it an agreement, some people call it a contract. What it is it's usually a no-cost program that's your contingency plan for your community. It comes with a structurized price list that is specific to your community. How rapid response team we do it is we have one that's very specific to condo, and then we have one that is commercial, and then we have HOA as well. So we break it down to specific, what is your community's needs and how can we best service your community in a post-storm situation. Where we take it a little bit different is we want to make sure that you're fully prepared. I need to know what I'm getting into in servicing you in a post-storm situation. So your restoration contractor should be sitting down with you and saying, okay, if you have landscaping at the front of your property, how am I as a restoration contractor going to get it into your property? Do you have a landscaping contract? We need to make sure that you're set up for success. And that's part of rapid response team's contract. Everybody's a little bit different. But what that structurized price list does for you in a post-storm situation is it allows you not to get gouged, and it allows your unit owners not to get gouged. Not every restoration company will extend the arm to the unit owners for post-service if it's not an association responsibility or not an association loss. So you need to make sure that you read that contract really well, because that is a clause I've seen in some post-storm contracts. With that being said, it's really, really important that your manager or whoever is your first responder on your property knows about that contract. I've seen people call 5 restoration companies in, but have a contract and didn't know they have a contract. So it needs to be communicated. The board needs to know, the membership needs to know that this is in place for them as well, if it does cover the membership. Okay. With cost savings, the one other thing that you need to think about and that your restoration contractor is going to ask you is, how are you planning on covering your deductible, which Nicole mentioned earlier? We want to know that you will have cash on hand to be able to pay us. Some restoration contractors, I don't in particular take any money up front when I'm coming to service you in a post-storm situation. You need to ask your restoration contractor, what do they require as a percentage of your deductible if they need that in a post-storm situation. And most do. Some of the big ones do not. I know myself, I don't think Belfort does either, but most restoration contractors want cash on hand when they show up to the property. So how are you going to get that cash for them is going to be their first question they ask you when you pick up the phone and call them in a post-storm situation. The other thing with the post-storm contract is most of them should guarantee you some sort of storm auto response or priority over non-contract clients. You need to ask the restoration contractor, where do I fall in your list in a post-storm situation? Am I in your top 5? Am I in your bottom? How many contracts do you have? That's a really, really important question as an association to ask them. If you're not giving them business year round, I can guarantee you, you're going to fall lower and lower and lower on that list. And remember, it's okay to have agreements with multiple companies in the restoration industry. You should have a backup plan if your restoration contractor can't get to you. it's okay to do that. And it's okay to share the wealth year round with giving work to different restoration contractors. So you guarantee yourself that post-storm situation to be the best outcome possible. So think of us as like you would have a plumber. You have your big plumber for your big losses, your big pipe replacements. You have your small plumber that does your tiny fixes on a day-to-day, but he's one guy in a truck. Make sure you have a plan for your big loss and your small loss, and that your contractor, your restoration company can handle that for your building.
Excellent points. And that's a great point that you bring up of having the multiple contracts. I think a lot of managers and board members are probably not aware of that. And that's a great strategy, because at the end of the day, what you need to make sure is that you're looking out for the well-being of the residents within that community, and having whatever strategies possible, it's important. So I know we're coming up on the hour, but I think there's a couple questions that are very important for us to address in today's call. Paul, I want to kind of throw it back at you, because I know this is a big unknown when it comes to legal fees. What are your recommendations for boards on like keeping legal costs down if possible? I know some boards don't even like to budget for legal fees, and we're trying to clear them that you're one of the pillars in what we do, because we need to get a lot of information from you, or I should say get opinions and so forth. So what do you recommend with regards to maybe budgeting a number or keeping that number down?
Well, my first recommendation is at least budget a reasonable number for I wouldn't call them unknowns, but the suspected things that you're going to come across, whether it's the pipe leak analysis, what we do with that, the day-to-day types of issues for violations or governing document enforcement, et cetera. So budget a reasonable number, right? You can always over budget for that number. Unfortunately, I agree with you. It's really difficult to budget for that unknown, either individual who has created an official records inspection issue that has cost more than we expected, or is being uncooperative with respect to the association's communication to resolve an issue, perhaps on a reasonable basis, and your attorney's fees increase as a result of that type of situation. For other situations, you may have a claim that may be referred to insurance, is picked up as a claim for insurance, but we don't know that, and we don't know whether or not the board of directors has determined to turn that over in insurance. I think the takeaway point is don't be too conservative with your line item for your attorney's fees. As we know, sometimes referring something to your counsel at the outset is a much better idea and less costly than waiting and trying to work it out through the board or using your manager to try to give you the best advice, which puts your manager in a difficult position. So I think overall the takeaway point is don't be too conservative, and don't be afraid to call your legal counsel. If you don't have a relationship with your legal counsel where you can call them and say, hey, listen, we appreciate your time and service, but we want to know at the outset, what is this going to cost us? Which of course is a difficult answer for me to answer. But at least for some things I can say, hey, listen, this is what we're going to do. If it's a contract review, this is where we're going to handle it. Always at least budget as a volunteer board. Always please budget at least the amount that it should cost or require to review those contracts. Even if they're smaller contracts, I can give you an example of a pool repair that was a $10,000 contract. Council did not review it. The pool collapsed as a result of the negligence of the contractor, and now it has cost them a lot more money than it should have cost them. So even your smaller contracts, if you have that relationship with your legal counsel to say, listen, it's a small contract, I want you to take a look at it. At least we can do the bare minimum to protect you with an addendum. But ultimately, the answer to your question, Raphael, is don't be too conservative there. It is certainly a line item that you don't want to go over on. But at the outset of any legal representation for a bigger issue, your legal counsel should be able to say, listen, this is going down this track. So you increase that, and hopefully you don't have to do an amended budget or a special assessment for those types of charges or fees that you didn't anticipate at the outset. I do believe it is one of the more difficult items to budget for. You just don't know what's going to come at you with respect to legal fees.
Correct. And I would agree. And as you stated, there's different things that you could do if you're obtaining opinions as a manager, or if you're self-managed, making sure that you're saving those opinions so that you can reference them in the future and not have to go back and forth requesting multiple opinions, make that part of the official records. Also, there's different ways to look at your previous history. Are you coming up on any contract renewals? Are you coming up on a concrete restoration that you will need the attorney to review? And as Paula said, I know many times they want management to kind of go over and give their insight, and the statute's very clear on what we can and can't do. So working with the attorneys is very important. It's part of what we do, and it's important that there is something budgeted for that expense. So as we wrap up here, Nicole, I wanted to get your insight. I'm sure you get this question many times. I know we highly recommend it. How important is it for an association to have a reserve study in order to properly present a budget to their membership?
It's the most important. They're required to have a schedule. Under 718, they're required to have that schedule put out with the budget. So if they don't have a reserve study done and the board is doing that, are they really qualified to be able to give those estimated replacement costs, estimated lives on them? No, I wouldn't be relying on the board. They should be having a study done every 3 to 5 years. And especially after COVID, if you haven't had one done in 2 years, 3 years, you should be updating it. Those costs have drastically changed, and you're probably not fully funding based on that schedule. So I think it is one of the most important things to be getting done, especially at this budget time.
Okay, I'm going to leave it here with you. We got a couple questions. If you're all okay, maybe we go another 5 minutes because we have maybe a good 8 or 9 questions. That way we can address some of the concerns. Nicole, I have a question here that says associations reserves say that the hurricane deductible cannot be a reserve line item because it has no specific timeline and therefore does not meet the NRSS 4-part test. I think that has to do when it comes to the question where now they allow you to put it into the reserves where you were mentioning earlier.
It's a non-statutory reserve. So what happens is if you're in the pooling method, it won't be in your pooling schedule. On the component method, it's a below the line. So I always say to my boards, it's like a savings account. It's a separate fund you're setting aside for the insurance deductible, but it's not restrictive. So if you needed it for operating, you could use it. So it's a separate line item. It's not a part of the reserve calculation for fully funding.
Excellent. Thank you, Nicole. I think, Matt, this one's for you. Armando asks, he says, they've recently hired an engineer to conduct a recertification study based on Miami-Dade and Broward protocols. Should this help with our insurance going forward? You're on mute, Matt. You're on mute,
You're muted, Matt.
Doing so well.
Yeah.
You can probably read my facial expression though. The short answer is it won't hurt you. Some companies, it'll absolutely help you more than with others. I've seen different companies absolutely require an engineering report to give me quotes on waterfront high rise, and others are still a little bit more flexible with it. It's one of those things that as we get further away from Surfside, we'll see how companies start implementing. I think everybody's going to be changed in some way or not, but it absolutely will not hurt you to have those.
Okay, thank you, Matt.
Raphael, I just want to point out really quickly. It's something I've seen a couple times, which brings me a lot of concern. If you are not in Miami-Dade or Broward, you're not required to be recertified at this point in time. So we can't anticipate what the legislature is going to require any other county building to be recertified. Whatever that comes in 2022 is whatever it will be. What I have seen, which I caution, is I have seen middlemen trying to say, okay, I'm a project manager and I can help you receive or get your recertification according to Broward or Miami-Dade. And I will tell you that Palm Beach County did publish by kind of a newsletter the Broward certification requirements to our high-rise condos with a recommendation that this is what you should be looking towards. But please, again, consult your attorney if you have a middleman who says, I do this and this, and I can help you with getting an engineer and getting your recertification, and this is what I'm going to do for you. I've seen it already a few times just with my clients. They've charged double what your engineer would charge. As a board, you are able to directly engage an engineer. You do not need a middleman for that. So just be on the lookout for that. I anticipate, because we're in Florida and we have Florida man syndrome, we're going to see a lot of that. There's going to be, somebody out there to take advantage of the board who's concerned, wants help, is looking for help. There's going to be that person. So I just want, for our listeners out there, just be on the lookout. You can hire your own engineer to come and inspect and give you a thorough inspection of your building. Even if you're not Miami-Dade, Broward, a thorough inspection, looking for spalls, looking for different things like that. I just want to put that out there because that is a concern of mine. I've seen it a few times in the last couple months.
No, yeah, that's definitely an excellent point, especially for those self-managed communities that maybe aren't working with the management company. It's a little bit easier for them to sneak in and make certain suggestions that aren't necessarily true with what's going on. But as you stated, there's different things going on. Boca came out with a potential recommendation of what they're going to do. So you definitely need to consult with your attorney or management company or whoever it is you're working with to at least get the team together, because ultimately it's a team that helps you to make sure that you're making the right decision for your community. I'm going to keep it back at you, Paula. Janet asked, legal opinions, are they part of the official records?
In most instances, they would be part of the official records. If it's a very general issue with respect to who's responsible for the windows or what do we do with this common area, et cetera, for our HOA listeners out there. I know we've been kind of focusing on condos, but yes, generally they are. Your attorney should label any opinion letter that is protected by the attorney-client privilege or work product privilege in bold at the top. And if the attorney does that, then you know to separate that from the official records. The best person to ask for that is your attorney that issued the opinion. Most of the time they are, and I don't know who pointed that out, but it was a great reference. I think it was Raphael. I think you pointed out, keep those attorney opinions in an accessible file, because oftentimes when we have new clients or clients who have been with us for several years say, well, so-and-so issued an opinion on this 10 years ago. Our documents haven't changed. It's very helpful for me to look at that opinion and say, well, maybe it's this or that, but it's very helpful and it's cost effective because you can refer back to that opinion. I can give that opinion a second blessing and say, go with it and not issue a new opinion that could be, a couple hours worth of work. So definitely keep the opinions in a place where you can definitely reference those. And if you have questions as to whether or not those are privileged, you should ask the attorney that issued the opinion.
Okay, excellent. And I'm going to leave it with this last one, Matt. There's several here, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time here as well as our listeners. Matt, there's a question here, like what happens when insurance becomes impossible to find? We have a 48-year-old condo 48-year-old condo, one-story flat roof construction, and it has a spray foam on it. And I guess they're having a challenge finding insurance. What are your recommendations when you come across those situations?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, that's what Citizens is for. It is the Florida market of last resort, and it's got some key coverages that are stripped. So if you have anything in the same ballpark, I always recommend staying out of Citizens if you can. Another big problem with Citizens is you can be assessed up to a certain percentage of your premium if Citizens fall short on what they have to pay after a major storm. And with how much they've grown, there's talks that there's going to be another increase or an additional increase added to their rate filing at this point. So Citizens is considered the market of last resort. They can be extremely difficult to get quotes out of at this point. They require, up until this week, they required an appraisal within 12 months. Now they'll accept an appraisal dated within the last 36. They require wind mits within 5 years. And then they require their own specific roof inspection form. And if you don't clear those 3 hurdles, you do not get a quote from them and you cannot bind coverage with them. So that's not to be too critical, but for the market of last resort, it's not exactly easy to get a quote out of them. And then anybody who's moving to Citizens, what you need to be prepared for after that is, even though they require the appraisal, when their inspectors come out, they do their own modeling of what they think your value should be. And I have a couple of clients right now where they've moved to Citizens at significant increases, and now Citizens wants to bump up their values by an additional 30%. One in particular, it was frame construction with old roofs and termites, and they about doubled to get into Citizens, and now Citizens is going to hit them with a increase in TIV, and you're arguing with the state. So I guess the short answer is that's the market of last resort. If you can find coverage elsewhere, hopefully we can. I started this thought earlier and I didn't quite finish it. And when you look at market dynamics and you've seen premiums go up, started 5-10% and everybody was, I was screaming at that and nobody wanted it. Now we're up to 20, went to 15, 25. And if I get a 20 to 25% increase at this point, I'm sad to say that I'm considering that a pretty good renewal in this market. You're going to see premiums drive up and up and up. And even though the companies are leaving because they don't think they're making money, eventually there's a threshold where somebody who's not in the market now is going to say, hey, I think we can make some money on this. And I think there's a few statutory things that need to change in order for the companies to have the optimistic outlook. But that's when you see the market turn around and start seeing premiums go down and down and down. Because look at after Wilma, it took about 2 years, which is the same trend as from Irma. It took about 2 years for the rates to just skyrocket. And then everybody was with Citizens and there were 3 companies, and especially if you're on the water, everyone was with Citizens. And then the rates got high enough and we went enough years without a storm. And that's another thing that I think is overlooked is we had over 10 years without a hurricane making landfall in the continental US. The previous record was 6 years. So it had never been done before. And so the companies made a lot of money over these years. You have a ton of competition in the market. And then we were down to just absolutely ridiculous rates where every year we were saying, I don't know how the rate can go any lower. Yeah. I had high rises I was writing for 11 cents, an 11-cent rate, which
wow,
you get that up in Canada where they don't have hurricanes. So just ridiculous rates that we didn't believe were possible, but there was so much competition and there hadn't been any storms. And unfortunately it's going the other way now. But when you look at the market, it's very cyclical. When you get a hard market, rates drive up, coverages are hard to get. And eventually it turns once you get the right amount of competition and, get some. We've had some pretty adverse selection in the last few years with the wildfires and how catastrophic those are. That can't be underestimated, because when you have those fire losses, it's not just you have to replace your roof, it's the entire building burned to the ground and you have to rebuild the entire value of it again.
Yeah.
And then they're all these companies that we're insured with, they're all reinsured by effectively the same company. So even though your insurer for your wind in Florida isn't footing the bill, they still get their backing from the same person paying the claims as out in California right now. So we're all really tied together on a global scale.
And it seems like that's it. That's with everything now. So it's a situation that we're all dealing with. But yeah, I'd like to wrap up now, give everyone an opportunity maybe to have any closing remarks dealing with the budget of an unknown. So Erin, if you want to start with any closing remarks.
Thank you, Raphael. Thank you guys all for joining us today. My biggest takeaway is you can budget for your restoration bill. We can help you do that. You just need to have a plan and have a process and a procedure for when these events do occur, and making sure that you are getting those contracts, you are getting those agreements for post-storm expenses, so you don't get gouged on the other side of a storm is going to be key in your success for recovery.
Great. Thank you so much, Erin. Nicole, any closing remarks or suggestions?
Sure. Thank you so much. I guess the most important is everybody that's on this panel, Erin, Paula, Matt, and Raphael, please rely on them. When you're doing your budget, reach out to them. They're the people that are going to help you get through this and tell you what other associations are doing, because as we all know, there's going to be increases this year in the budgets. Everybody across the board. I mean, it's averaging 5 to 10%. So rely on these professionals. They know what they're doing. Thank you for your time today, everybody.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. Paula?
Thank you, Raphael, and thank you everyone on the panel. It was a great panel. I think from my perspective, your budget really is your engine for your association. It's where it starts and where it stops. So you really have to take time and attention. And as Nicole mentioned, use your resources. Again, as a volunteer board, use your resources. They are there for you. And each and every one of us can always assist in either a simple question or a more complicated question to formulate that budget that's really going to take you, again, through the next year. And it's going to take you, if you've done it the right way and you've done it, in a conservative approach, it's going to make sure that you don't have that headache or that nightmare or that issue pop up. You've got a resolution to it. You've budgeted for it. You know what's ahead. So thank you all again for attending.
Thank you, Paula. Matt?
Just say thanks for everybody for joining us. It's been a brutal couple of years as far as the insurance goes. I'm tired of being the least liked person in any room that I walk into because everybody's waiting to hear what I have to say. But budget as well as you can. There's certain things that you can expect today. You know, you rewind to last year and I'm short 11 or 12 companies today that I had in my pocket last year when I was doing those budgets. And, you know, in line with the title of this webinar is there was no way to prepare for that, but that many companies exiting the market and it being as bad as it's been. But being prepared now that we've seen what 1 year of this can look like, being as prepared as you can for that and having a way to move forward.
Thank you so much, Matt. And I agree with the entire panel. It was an excellent webinar. Thank you all for putting the time, pulling the time aside to take some time to educate the board members and managers. My tip is really just to take the opportunity, make sure you're dealing with, similar to what Nicole mentioned, with the industry experts. Take the time to reach out. If they're experts in their field, they're going to provide you with whatever information they can to be able to help you. But more importantly, is just as board members, is just to make sure that you listen. Because there are many changes, there are going to be many impacts. It's not just this year. It's things that are going to impact us in the upcoming years, especially with the labor shortage, with Amendment 2, with the increases in insurance and construction costs. So it's a reality that we all need to start facing now. And if we face it now, it'll be much easier as the years continue to pass. So I wanted to thank everyone behind the scenes, Ashley, Katie, and everyone else on your teams that helped put this webinar together. And I want to thank all the board members and managers that attended. It says a lot about you and the leadership skills that you have to continue to learn to better serve your residents, So thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Have a great one, everyone.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day.
Bye.
You.